Ian here from Backroad Buddies, and the video we want to share with you today is about our electric vehicle road trip from Denver, Colorado to Columbus, Ohio. So since electric vehicles are somewhat new, especially for long distance, we thought we'd keep track of all our statistics on the way out there so we could share them with you. So why an electric vehicle, or EV? So we only own two vehicles. One is a 23-foot RV, a Winnebago Echo that we call Redtail Lodge, or just Redtail. And then an electric vehicle, which is a 2022 Volkswagen ID.4 that we call Heidi. Now, we bought Heidi with the intention of only driving it around town. It was going to be our second vehicle while we had our RV in storage. Last October, we wanted to make a trip to Columbus to meet up with some college buddies for an Ohio State football game. And we don't like flying, so we were going to drive, but we really didn't want to drive our RV out there for the game. One, we were staying in a hotel with our friends out there. We weren't sure if Redtail would actually fit into the parking spaces of the hotel and whether they would even allow us to park an RV overnight in the hotel parking lot. So we thought taking the EV, or Heidi, out there would be a nice experiment, and hopefully you find it interesting. Planning. So we knew traveling with an EV would have to be planned out a little better than when you just hop in a gas engine vehicle or a hybrid, because electric charging stations or superchargers, the network just isn't as large as gas stations are around the country. So we knew we needed to investigate that and make sure we knew where we were going to refuel. Our route, luckily, between Denver and Columbus is mostly Interstate 70, and we researched where the charging stations were along there, and it looked like they were nicely spaced. So the VW ID.4 has an EPA rating of about 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour. That is for highway. Highway efficiency is less than the city efficiency for an electric vehicle, which is kind of backwards from a gas engine. Because the ID.4 has a capacity of about 82 kilowatt hours. Our range was about 230 miles. So we could use that, and we wanted to be well within that to plan, because we don't want to run out. Because we've heard towing an EV isn't an easy thing to do. So here's a map of the route we took. So here's Denver, here's Columbus. And we plan to do it in 3 days. So our first night was in Salina, Kansas, which is about here. And our second night was in St. Charles, just outside of St. Louis. And then the third night would be then in Columbus. Now, we've made this trip quite a few times in both a gas engine and a hybrid vehicle, and 3 days is typically what we take anyway to get to Ohio, because we don't like driving more than 8 hours in one day. So this is what the first day of driving looked like. So here we are, we're kind of on the north side of Denver. We came, and our first charging stop was the Electrify America station in Flagler, Colorado. Then we made another stop in Colby, Kansas, and another one in Hayes, and those were both Electrify America, before we spent the night in Salina, and we went to an Electrify America station in Salina as well. So here are the stats from day one. So we went from Broomfield to Flagler, 133 miles, drive time of 2 hours and 5 minutes. Stop time was 52 minutes. Of that, 43 minutes we were actually charging, and we went from a 41% state of charge to a 90% state of charge, and we were 100% when we left home. And so we actually weren't charged any for that supercharger, because it was Electrify America, and the first 2 years on the Volkswagen ID.4, at least when we bought ours, we had 2 years of 30 minutes of charging for free at Electrify America stations. So we didn't get charged, but had we paid full price, we would have paid $19.60. So then you can see the next stretch was Flagler to Colby, 111 miles, hour and a half of driving, about a half-hour charging time. Again, we went from like 41% to 86%. That one we went a little over our, we went 1 minute over our 30-minute charging, so we were actually charged 18 cents for that. The next one was Colby to Hayes, so we actually, that was another 100 or so miles, an hour and a half of driving, about a half-hour charging time, 38% to 85, and again, no charge. And then we went from Hayes to Salina, another 108 miles, almost 2 hours of driving, half-hour charge, 37 to 85, and again, no charge. Now, if you notice, we weren't taking it up to 100%, and that's because we didn't think we needed the range. We normally have to stop about every hour and a half to 2 hours for a bathroom break anyway. Most of these stations are outside of Walmarts, so we were able to go into Walmart, use the bathroom, buy a drink. In Flagler, we actually went to a coffee shop nearby and had something to eat. So our stops were all revolving around where the stations were, but we were able to get food and drinks and bathrooms. And if you notice, we were only stopped for about half an hour to an hour, which was time to go to the bathroom, get a drink. We actually did some walks around the parking lots at the Walmarts, but we really didn't feel like we were just sitting and waiting for the vehicle to charge, which we were kind of expecting to, but that didn't really seem to be the case. Now, we weren't going up to 100%, and as I said before, it was because we didn't feel like we needed the range to get to our next stop. And also, it takes a lot more time to charge the closer you get to 100%. So it's not linear. The time to charge is not linear. So it's much faster to charge from 25% to 50% than it is from 75% to 100. So keep that in mind. So here's a map of our route for the second day. So we went from Salina over to St. Charles. If you notice, this little side trip here was kind of unplanned. We had stopped here for a charging station, and then as we were taking the little bypass around Topeka, we made a wrong turn and ended up on this toll road, and there wasn't another exit for 29 miles. So we went 29 miles out of our way and then worked our way back up to I-70. In the meantime, we had to make another stop here, which was different than our originally planned charging stop, but we were able to make that work. So here are the stats from day 2, Salina to Topeka, very typical from the day before. So we were charged for 40 minutes. So we went over our 30 minutes. So we did get a little bit of a charge there. We did 43 minutes in Lenexa and 28 minutes in Boonville, and then when we got to St. Charles, we actually charged there, and again, we only charged up to 80%. And so our total actual charges for the day was $40.38. So here's what day 3 looked like. We went from St. Charles to Columbus, well, actually east of Columbus, called Blacklick. We stopped at 1, 2, 3 Electrify America stations. This was Effingham, Illinois, just outside of Indianapolis, and I think this is called Huber Heights in Ohio. Again, these stats aren't looking much different than before. We were charging for our 30 minutes. Actually, this Terre Haute one, we didn't charge for very long because we knew we didn't have that far to go. So you can see the numbers here. So our total charge for the day was $9.29. Pretty routine at this point. Now this is a map of the Columbus area. We were actually staying at a relative's house here over in Blacklick. And so we had to drive over here to the hotel where we stayed for 2 nights with our buddies to go see the football game. So we actually charged on regular house current overnight at our relative's house, and then we drove here, spent 2 nights at the hotel, and we didn't drive anywhere once we were there. We were able to walk to the stadium and walk to dinner, and so we basically drove there, and then at the end of 2 days we drove back and spent another night in Blacklick, and again charged using house current overnight. So the stats for the Columbus area are kind of weird. We actually this only shows the one. 45 to 63% was the second night we charged at our relative's house. The first night I think was similar, like 45 to 61%. And so the total kilowatt hours that we added while we were there. So we didn't actually pay our relative for the electricity, but for the full price we were assuming that his electric rate was about 15 cents per kilowatt hour. That's what we get charged at home in our home. So I don't know if that's actually true or not, but that's what we used for our trip total calculations. So then we started heading back home. This day 7 was very similar to day 3. We stopped in Hubert Heights, Indianapolis, Terre Haute, and Effingham, Illinois before reaching St. Charles. So it was pretty much the same stops as before. So here are the stats from day 7. Exact same mileage, no surprise there. And so it was pretty much similar thing, except we only started out 63%, but we worked our way back up to 90% by the time we got to St. Charles. Now here is day 8 on the way back. If you notice, we didn't have that detour around Topeka because we didn't make a wrong turn this time. So we actually stopped at a different station. We stopped at a station here out on I-70 as opposed to the one that we stopped in Lenexa before, but otherwise it was pretty much the same route. So here are the stats from day 8. They look pretty similar. We started charging a little bit more just to make sure we would get to the next stop without getting too worried about it. So we were charging up to 92% sometimes. And so we were going over our 30 minutes of charge time. So we had a little bit more charges, $12.54. Now this was due to probably several factors. One, the weather was starting to change, and we were going west, which means we were increasing in elevation and we were going against the prevailing wind. And we've noticed this in gas engines and hybrid engines driving this route too. It's always much more efficient to travel east on I-70 than it is to travel west. And this is day 9. So we started out in Salina. We stopped at the 3 stations we did before, but as we weren't getting as much fuel efficiency, we probably could have made it home, but just to be a little more comfortable, we stopped at another charging station. And this was a charge point, which isn't on Electrify America, so we had to pay full price for that one. So as you see, here's the charging station in Bennett where we had to, and I mean, it wasn't too bad. Actually, we paid less there than we did at some of the Electrify America stations. $5.86 to go from, that's home. $7.53 to go from 44% to 69%. So not too bad, although that's not a very long charge. It was only 19 kilowatt hours, where these other ones were much larger. If you notice, we were trying to charge up closer to 100%. And then we still had a 53% charge on our batteries when we got home. So we actually brought that back up to 100% so we could determine what our totals were for the whole trip. So here are the trip total statistics. So we went a total of 2,776 miles, a total driving time of 44.2 hours. We were stopped for 14 hours. With a charging time of 19, that's skewed because we did those 2 overnight chargings. I'm like, how do we have more charging time than stop time? But that included those long charging times overnight. And then the actual price that we paid for the whole trip for fuel was $116.08. Now, if we would have paid full price at all those superchargers, it would have been $575.78. And then this last column, I was trying to figure out if in the future, because you would think that as the supercharger stations get more and more common and more prevalent, and that eventually those prices would come down. Now, it would be nice if they could come down as low as the rates that we could get at our house, which is 15 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, whether it would ever get there, probably not. But just for comparison, if we would have paid our house rates for all that charging, it would only have been $161.85. So you can see that using the superchargers is really much more expensive than charging an electric vehicle at home. Now, I was trying to compare that with a gas engine to try to kind of see, did we save money over taking the RV out there? So I assumed $3 per gallon, which is about what the average price was across the country at the time we took the trip. So if you said, this many miles at that price, it would be the equivalent of getting 72 miles per gallon vehicle, which I don't know if there's any vehicle out there that can do that well. So the actual price that we paid, yes, we did save money by taking EV. Now, if we would have paid full price and not gotten those 30 minutes free at the charging stations, then a 14 mile per gallon vehicle would have been the same amount of money. So this is down in the range of where our RV is. So we saved a little bit over our RV, but not by a whole lot. And then if you could get those price of those chargers down, electricity at those chargers, then it would have been equivalent to 51 miles per gallon. So you would think over time that eventually an EV would be cheaper fuel cost to go cross country than a gas engine would be, unless you can, beat that miles per gallon. Our average driving speed was 63 miles per hour. The average mileage between stops was 102. Our average driving time between stops was a little over an hour and a half. Our stop time was averaged at 40 minutes, and our charging time averaged 35 minutes. And so this was our average full price of a stop was $21.98. So those are kind of our trip totals. So if we look at our fuel efficiency over the whole trip, different places quote it kind of differently. So, some say kilowatt hours per 100 miles, that would have been 38.87. If you do watt hours per mile, that's 389. And if you did miles per kilowatt hour, it's 2.6. So if we compare those fuel efficiency numbers that we got on our trip and compare them to the EPA ratings, which they start out with these mile per gallon electric or equivalent or something, which I don't know, if you look into how that's calculated, that's kind of a really bogus number. I mean, it's good for comparison between EVs, but it's not good for comparing an EV to a gas engine. So then if you equate that to watt hours per mile and miles per kilowatt hour, you'll see that for the highway rating, the EPA is 2.8 and we got 2.6. So that's pretty comparable to what the EPA gets. Yeah, according to the EPA, these are the ranges we should get. We should get 230 miles on the highway, more in the city, 262. So it was kind of nice to get real numbers and compare it to what the EPA ratings are. Our conclusions. First, is an EV road trip different from a gas or hybrid road trip? Absolutely. You have to plan your stops much more carefully because superchargers are not as available as gas stations are. There's not as many of them. They're not everywhere like gas stations are. So you have to plan where the superchargers are, and that's where your stops are. So that's going to dictate where you go to the bathroom, where you eat. So it's different than just going in your gas vehicle until it gets low and then start looking for a gas station. You can't do that unless you really want to get yourself in trouble. But that being said, there are quite a few EV stations, so it's not impossible. You just need to plan ahead. The other difference is it's going to take more time to stop and refuel. Now, we thought this was going to be more of a pain than it actually was. I mean, we typically only stopped for about half an hour, and usually that was enough time to go to the bathroom, get a drink, maybe get a short walk in. And so we really didn't feel like we were sitting around waiting for the car to charge like we thought we would. But you are stopping often to refuel, where in a gas vehicle you'd probably go for a longer period of time before you refueled. So there is a difference there. But it is longer, but we didn't find it to be that much of a hindrance or to slow down our total trip by a significant amount. Is driving an EV cheaper than a gas or hybrid? That's a hard question to answer because there's a lot of variables, and it depends which EV vehicle you're talking about. Ours is only about in the mid-range as far as fuel efficiency is. There's some that are better, there are some that are worse, but the same can be said for gas and hybrid of what's your fuel efficiency of those. And then there's other variables in there, how fast you drive and, what the weather is and the prevailing winds and, elevation change. As far as cost too, the superchargers are expensive. They're much higher price than charging at home. So it's not as much of a savings as you might think it is because those superchargers are expensive. Now, as time goes on and there's more superchargers available, hopefully those prices will come down, and then eventually it'll almost always be cheaper to go in an EV. Now, that may not turn out to be true, but that's kind of where I see things heading. So the other thing you might be thinking of, well, driving an EV creates so much less pollution than driving a gas or hybrid. Well, that may or may not actually be true. It depends where that electricity comes from. So you may be moving where the pollution is being generated. Now, at the superchargers, we don't have control of where that electricity comes from. It could be coming from a coal plant, and it's just polluting in one place as opposed to polluting all along the highway like the gas engine is. So it all depends where the electricity comes from. Now, again, this is another one that I think will improve with time, over time, as we convert more of our power generation or electricity generation to cleaner methods like solar and wind and hydro, that pollution for an EV will eventually be lower than a gas engine. But I don't have the numbers to know whether that's really true today or not. So that's all we have for you. So I hope you found this information useful and hopefully helpful if you're considering an EV long road trip, or at least give you things to think about and consider if you're planning one. Thanks for watching, and if you want more details about our trip, look in the description below for a link to our related blog post. In the blog post, you also find a link to a spreadsheet with that data that I was showing on the screen before, if you want to kind of dive into those numbers a little more. If you haven't already, please subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Ta-ta for now.